I'm John Batchelor. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com is with me. He's on the road. He's in Western Canada. We're joined by Rick Fisher, a senior analyst at the International Assessment and Strategy Center. The subject at hand is the increase in Chinese military budget. However, these last days, and we'll discuss it several times this evening, there was a surprise, sudden aggression by the Chinese in the South China Sea. We've talked about this vast area of water, much attention for the seas and oceans and straits of Southeast Asia these last weeks, especially over these last days, searching for the missing airline. This is a South China Sea that borders on Vietnam, reaches down to the archipelago, to the Philippines, and north towards China. China has generally claimed this as its own territory, but within these last days, a sudden move by Chinese militaries slash a civilian craft around something very strange called the Second Thomas Shoal, which isn't quite an inhabited island, but it's at the opening, the access to the Reed Bank, which is oil and gas reserves in the South China Sea. On a map, it says that it's Filipino. Rick Fisher joins us, and Rick is going to comment for me as to whether there's a connection between the increase in the Chinese military budget, said to be 12.2%, and the move against the Second Thomas Shoal. Good evening, Rick. Do these things match up? We spend more money and we make a move on another piece of the Philippines. Good evening.
Good evening, John. Yes, indeed. You spend more money, you can buy more and larger ships, which the Chinese are doing. And they will use these larger ships to consolidate their long-standing claim to most of the South China Sea. The Filipinos have an old American LST on the Second Thomas Shoal. 2 years ago, the Chinese beached one of their own frigates on a nearby shoal and then quickly pulled it off. In my opinion, an exercise in intimidating the Filipinos, showing them how they're going to pull the old LST off Second Thomas Shoal, which is occupied by about a dozen Philippine Marines, and it was China's move to stop a resupply mission to this LST, which is the subject of the latest dust-up.
Gordon?
Well, Rick, it's very interesting that the Filipinos then decided that if they could not resupply that old hospital ship, which is grounded on Second Thomas Shoal, they would resupply it from air, which is what they did on Monday or Tuesday. Does this situation have the possibility of escalation as the Chinese try to block the Philippines and the Philippines then tries to resupply?
Well, now they have to shoot down airplanes, and the Americans could make this a little easier if we wanted to by giving our Philippine treaty allies GPS-guided parachute cargo containers, which we've been using for quite a while in places like Afghanistan. We could give the Filipinos the ability to precision deliver food and materiel to their troops. But if we do that, the Chinese then have the option of crossing the real line, which would be to actually kill somebody, shoot down an airplane, fire at the ship. And if they do that, the Filipinos would expect would trigger our defense treaty. And we've been dropping some pretty strong hints earlier this year that we would follow through if the Chinese actually attack or kill Filipinos.
The press report from Washington, Rick, is that the United States is troubled by the incident at the Second Thomas Shoal. How does Beijing interpret the U.S. being troubled? Does it run away? Does it apologize? Does it ignore it?
Well, former Secretary of State Clinton was instrumental in creating this aura of troubledness. She was the first Secretary of State in a long time to differentiate between China's claims and China's actions. Previously, we had been strictly neutral about everybody's territorial claims in the South China Sea, which, in my opinion, for many years has been detrimental to American interests because there's really only one side that's really threatening and offensive in that region, and that was China. And we should have stood up to Chinese aggrandizement a long time ago, like perhaps 25 years ago, but we haven't, and now we're paying a price. Secretary Clinton tried to raise the rhetoric, but the Chinese have called our cards. They're continuing with pushing the other claimants out, and so far we've really done nothing to cause them concern.
Gordon?
So, Rick, what we have here is another escalation ladder, it seems to me, as China continues to push the United States and its allies, and we have to make a decision at some point. I mean, do we have the naval forces that are necessary to effectively contain the Chinese in both the East China and South China Seas?
Well, yes, we do, but we'd have to send them there. We'd have to supply them. We'd have to have an agreement with our Filipino allies that they would be there. They would need air support, which means more forces would have to be deployed. And then the Chinese would start playing with us. And that would get really interesting. Or we could act like a really strong power that we are and treat our ally like an ally and start shoving excess airplanes and ships in their direction. Something that we've been reluctant to do for reasons that I don't quite understand.
The second Thomas Shoal doesn't look like a point to go to war over. It does, however, look like a theme that's being developed. China wants these natural resources. At least it wants to make claim to them. The Philippines also makes claims to these natural resources, but I understand over these last years, 2 years ago, they wanted to do exploration, but it stopped because of this tension. Is there a way to resolve this without using warships, Rick? Have they talked about sharing?
Yes, indeed. The Filipinos and the other claimants are all very interested in developing resources and setting aside their territorial disputes. The Chinese go along with this palaver, but in reality, they don't agree. They want to settle the territorial claims first and then be in the position to decide who benefits from the resources and to what extent.
So we really have an LST named number 57 floating out there, and the Chinese are willing to show off muscle in order to claim it and drive the Filipinos away.
That is what is happening today, yes.
Gordon, isn't this fantastic? I mean, every once in a while it occurs to me we're in the 21st century. This seems recognizably 19th. Or then again, isn't that where we are in the Ukraine? So shouldn't we be there in the 20th, the South China Sea as well?
Yeah, we certainly should be, John. You know, the Philippine President Aquino talked about this as 1938 because the Chinese are continually dismembering his country with Mischief Reef, Scarborough Shoal, now Second Thomas Shoal. And he basically said, you know, this resembles what happened in Czechoslovakia. And I have to say, he's probably right about that.
Wrong century, though, Gordon. That's too modern, 1938. This is just plain old land grab back in the old days of cavalry forces riding around. If you can garrison it, you can own it. Rick Fisher is a senior fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center. I know you think we're making it up. Second Thomas Shoal. Google it. You'll see right now the Filipinos are trying to air supply what looks to be a Chinese grab. I'm John Batchelor.